I think we'll go ahead and get started. People still out there, come on in, feel free. If you want to go grab some more food, by all means, go for it. Welcome to our first event for the Federalist Society in 2014. Excited to see a lot of returning faces as well as some new faces here. My name is Adam Hansen. I'm the president of the William Mitchell Federalist Society. We're very excited to partner with the Health Law Society here at Mitchell to bring two very distinguished speakers in their respective fields. Thank you for braving the snow and everything today. I know the commutes are pretty rough. We just appreciate y'all being here. The mission statement for the Federalist Society is that we're a nonpartisan, conservative, libertarian organization that is dedicated to freedom, federalism, and judicial restraint. The Federalist Society seeks to educate the legal community through its programs and publications about how limited constitutional government based on the rule of law can have a positive effect on law and public policy. Our national membership is over 40,000 strong. It includes lawyers, professors, although I don't think we have a single faculty member at Mitchell and the Federalist Society, but we'll work on that. We have judges, both state and U.S. Supreme Court justices that are Federalist Society members. So if you're a member, you're in very good company. And me too. And Professor Blackman. We take no position on any particular legal or public policy issues. Rather, our group feels that it's best just to debate and discuss the issues of the day so everybody can learn and grow from that. And now I'd like to introduce Professor Josh Blackman. Professor Blackman is an assistant professor at the South College, Texas, College of Law. He specializes in constitutional law, the United States Supreme Court, and the intersection of law and technology. He is the author of Unprecedented, the book you see above me here, The Constitutional Challenge to Obamacare. I just finished the book a little bit ago, and it's a wonderful read. Both Minnesota Senator Al Frank and Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann are mentioned, as well as, if you're interested, the Jersey Shore Snooki is in there, so you'll have to read the book.
I took out the Snooki slide.
You did?
I had a Snooki slide, but I took it out because no one laughed at it anymore. So
Okay, well, you can figure out how Snooki plays into
people here aren't so tan, so it doesn't really matter, but we're on something that's a big deal.
Exactly. So if you can figure out how Snooki plays into healthcare, let us know. Professor Blackman recently was selected by Forbes magazine for the 30 under 30 in law and public policy. It's a very, very nice distinction. He is the founder and president of the Harlan Institute, and he's also the founder of Fantasy SCOTUS.
I got an email from that the other day.
It's the internet's premier Supreme Court fantasy league and blogs at joshblackman.com. I suggest you all check that out. He has an active presence on Twitter.
And I was actually just tweeting a picture of all of you. That's what I was doing.
He has a kind of a, dare I say, an unprecedented approach to technology and education. He Google Hangouts his classroom, so students can watch his YouTube videos later, and his lecture notes are also available on there for a later time. He is clerk for the Honorable Danny J. Boggs of the U.S. Court of Appeals in the 6th District, as well as the Honorable Kim Gibson of the U.S. District Court for Western District of Pennsylvania. I'd like to now turn the floor over to Suzula Bidon. She is the president of the William Mitchell Health Law Society, and will introduce our next speaker.
Hello, I'm Suzula Bidon, president of the Health Law Society here at Mitchell. Thank you for coming today. Thank you, Adam and Federalist Society, for inviting us to team up with you on this event. It's going to be quite, I'm looking forward to it. So the Health Law Society is a William Mitchell organization, student organization, and we provide an opportunity for discussion and learning among students who share an interest in issues involving health law and policy. We try to assist students in increasing their understanding of legal, medical, and ethical issues relating to health law and policy through programs like this, community events, and other opportunities. And HLS is open, Health Law Society is open to all students. Our second speaker, who I will introduce now, is Angela Morley. And could you stand up so we get a preview?
Hello.
Thanks. Angela is the Director of Operations and an Associate in Health Policy, Law, and Ethics at the Minnesota Center for Healthcare Ethics in St. Paul. Angela attended St. Olaf College, where she was one of only 2 women in her class to major in physics and mathematics. A keen interest in patient advocacy and bioethics led her to William Mitchell, she's one of us, from which she graduated magna cum laude in 2008. She then went on to obtain a master's in public health with a focus on public health administration and policy. For the last 5 years, Angela has served 2 local health systems and the Sisters of St. Joseph of Coron as a health policy, public health, and law expert. She served as a clinical, organizational, and administrative ethics consultant and sits on multiple local hospital ethics committees and an institutional review board. Angela's professional passions include expanding access to affordable health care and minimizing the legal barriers inhibiting global access to life-saving drugs. And before I hand it over, I would just like to thank the Network for Public Health Law here at William Mitchell. And I'll introduce Brooke Nunn, and that's Katie Schmitter as well. She's just gonna come up and do a brief little explanation of what the network is, and then we'll really get started. So thank you for coming.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Angela and Susan, for Zazula and Josh and Adam and everyone for having us here today. My name is Brooke, and I work with the Network for Public Health Law. We are a national nonprofit organization, and our national coordinating center is based here at William Mitchell, and we're also associated with the Public Health Law Center. We provide free legal technical assistance and resources and educational opportunities to public health practitioners and legal advocates across the United States. We do a lot of work lately with health departments and other organizations who are examining health reform, as well as a variety of other topics such as health information data sharing and maternal and child health, emergency legal preparedness, the list kind of goes on. But as an option of our programming, we've started working with student groups who are interested in learning more about public health law. And so we've been working with Zazula and the Health Law Society, and we're really pleased to be here. We have some resources out on the table, and you can feel free to look at our resources online as well. So thank you.
And one final note. The format today, because we have limited time, index cards on chairs are for your questions. So if you have questions that come up during the presentations, please write them on the index cards or paper if you have it. We'll collect those and then we'll go through them and try and cover as much as we can that seems to come up repeatedly in terms of questions and areas of interest. And with that, Professor Blackman.
Thank you. All right, how's everyone doing today? Good? Well, thank you to the Federal Society, the Health Law Society, and everyone else on campus. This time last week, I was in Tucson, Arizona. It was a balmy 75 degrees. Today is not so warm, but to bring some heat, and we will, like I'm curious all the time, Life Teacher's Burger, make this well done, okay? You ever heard that one? You've heard that one. Life Teacher's Burger, well done. Anyway, this is a story. No, this is a story of constitutional law. The Affordable Care Act, commonly known as Obamacare, and just a brief note before I go ahead. I use the word Obamacare because this is a title that the president himself has used. Not anymore, but for a long time he did. After the Supreme Court decided the healthcare case, someone asked Rolling Stone, asked the president, do you like this word Obamacare? And he said, you know what, I want historians to call this Obamacare. I want this to be my legacy. He stopped saying that, though, this past October. If you actually go to his Facebook page, he stripped out every single mention of the word Obamacare anywhere. I have the screenshots, they were there. But I always use the word Obamacare because that's the word that's most commonly used. So this is really a story of both politics and law. How all three branches of our government collided in this constitutional battle over the Affordable Care Act. So a little bit of way of background, and Angela knows much more about this than I do. I'm just a mere constitutional law scholar. But in America, healthcare is expensive. It was very expensive. And there have been several efforts in our recent history of trying to reform it, to perhaps make it less expensive for some people. Okay? Now, who knows what this is a picture of? This is my litmus test for my 8th grade. What's the picture? Just shout it out.
The Clintons.
Yes. What are they doing?
They were introducing her healthcare reform.
Yes. Yes. This is what's pejoratively known as Hillary Care, right? I remember from the early 1990s, Bill Clinton appointed his wife, First Lady Clinton, to be a chairman of this task force for healthcare reform, and she had this thing called the Health Security Act. This was the idea that every American would have basically healthcare. It didn't work out so well. So who knows that this is just tougher? Ooh, anyone? Oh, okay. You should have at least one of those. These are the, you know? You read the book.
I would.
These are the Harry and Louise commercials, okay? These were commercials that were aired throughout the 90s. It was this Midwestern ma and pa sitting around the kitchen table, right? And they were talking about how this new healthcare plan might affect them. And you want to know what the crux of the commercials was? They said, you know what? We like our doctors. We want to keep them. We don't want to change our healthcare plans. We like our healthcare plans. Okay? Keep that in the back of your mind. A lesson was learned here that any promises to reform healthcare had to be made on if you like your doctor, you can keep it. Okay? That line didn't come from nowhere. That line came from here. They learned their lessons from the 90s. Anyway, the Clinton plan failed, And it wasn't until President Obama came to office that there was a significant effort to try to reform healthcare in the United States. And don't answer Adam. President Obama shares a record with President Roosevelt with respect to inaugurations. What is that record? I think we can figure this out. FDR and Obama share a record with respect to inaugurations. Yeah.
They'd be on 3 times.
4 times. 4 times, right? So FDR was elected 4 times, right? Obama was only elected twice, okay? But the first time he did the oath, he and the Chief Justice flubbed it, if you might recall. So they did a do-over the next day at the White House, right? Fast forward to 2012, the inauguration fell on a Sunday. That's a Constitution Day. It says inauguration January 20th. So they did the real one in the White House, and then a fake one in the Capitol the next day on a Monday. So he's actually taking the oath of office 4 more times. The take care clause probably wasn't in there, but he's gotten used to finding ways to take his oath several times. Okay? So, anyway. See, actually, the thing with the Chief Justice is interesting. The Chief Justice sent the President in 2009 a card that says, I'll read these words, then break, then I'll read these words, then break. Probably that card never made it to the President. So they were breaking at different points. So they both had committed it to memory, but they paused at different points, so it seemed like the President was talking over the Chief. It was just a mess altogether. But going back to healthcare, shortly after the President came into office, his main initiative was the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. We don't hear about the patient protection part anymore. The PP has just been dropped. No one even mentions it. It's most commonly known as either ACA or Obamacare, or you can call it whatever you like. But most commonly it's ACA. And at its heart, this law tried to do a lot of things, okay? Its main goal, as the name would suggest, was to make healthcare more affordable. And it would accomplish this through a number of means, some of which I'll talk about, some of which Angela will talk about as well. But the primary mechanism that I'm going to talk about is what's called the individual mandate. Okay? What's the mandate? As it stands now before the ACA, people might not buy health insurance. And at some point in their lives, they might develop an immediate need for it. And that would be very expensive to treat. Okay? So the idea was, if we make people get insurance earlier in life, and everyone has insurance, we'll have more people in the insurance risk pool, and this will decrease costs for everyone, right? That's the idea at a high level, okay? So how do we make people buy health insurance? So the idea of the mandate was one of conservative providence. It was invented by the Heritage Foundation, and it says this: you have to have insurance, and if you don't, you pay a penalty. It's a percentage of your income. It's complicated, but it starts at a few $100 a year, okay? You pay a penalty if you don't have insurance, okay? The question was, though, not just whether this was good policy, we can argue that for years, right? But can Congress make you buy health insurance? Was the individual mandate constitutional? And this was the question that was presented in the summer of 2009. So just a little way of background, your own home state was actually one of the definitive grounds for the Obamacare legislation. Why? Who was the 60th senator to join the Senate in 2010? Al Franken. Right? If Al Franken lost that election, we would not have Obamacare. It wouldn't happen, but but he was good enough and he was strong enough, and gosh darn, we'll talk about the Tea Party now. So the Tea Party, right? The Tea Party is an interesting group. This kind of sprung up almost out of nowhere in 2008, 2009, especially in the summer of 2009. And their rallying cry became Obamacare. Now, they didn't just oppose Obamacare because it was bad policy. Certainly they did. They didn't like the law, right? But their grounding and their objection to it was actually in terms of the Constitution. They argued that this was unconstitutional, that Congress could not force individuals to buy insurance. I remember I was in Washington once walking around, and so one of these Tea Party rallies, I saw a guy waving a sign around that said, "Overturn Wicker v. Filburn." Overturn Wicker v. Filburn. I didn't even know what that was until I got to my second year of law school. So, I mean, say what you will, but these people had some knowledge of the Constitution, and they deeply believed that this law violated it. And in our history, when you have groups that ground their opposition to things, and the Constitution becomes much more prominent. Think of the suffragists, or the abolitionists, or civil rights movements. When you have an argument in terms of the Constitution, it gains a salience that you don't have with just a policy right. So the Tea Party grew and grew up until they have these tens of thousands of people marching on Washington. In fact, They were marching on Washington at the very time that this law was being debated in the Senate. But no matter how unpopular this law was, the Democrats in Congress had a supermajority. Thanks again, as I mentioned, to Senator Al Franken's election. They got their 60th senator. I think he was the last one seated. I think he was seated like June 30th, 2009, give or take. I forget the exact date. But the moment Al Franken was seated, the president made the decision that he's going to go straight at it with 60 votes in the Senate. And when you have 60 votes in the Senate, is there a filibuster? No. Okay. Actually, the president made the call once the Al Franken election. Before the Al Franken election, they were thinking about it. Once Franken was seated, they were going to have with 60 votes. Okay? And the House as well, they had like a 50 or 60 vote lead. It wasn't even close. So the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act was actually introduced in its final version, I think the second week of December 2009. This is actually the final bill. Does anyone know how many pages the law was? Not Adam. Anyone else? I want to guess. Ooh, good, 2,700, very close. Yeah, usually I get like 10,000. This is like 4 copies of a bad Ayn Rand novel stacked on. Okay? And even more painful to read. So the bill was actually introduced in its final version the last, I think like the second week of December, and they were going to be pushing it for a Christmas Eve vote. Okay, why did they vote on it for Christmas Eve? Well, this wasn't meant to be a final vote. This was meant to be kind of a preliminary vote, make sure that all the members of their caucus were on record. And the idea was you do the preliminary vote, we send it to the House, right? The House makes some changes, send it back to the Senate makes some changes, you know, schoolhouse rocks, right? Both houses participate in the process. That was the idea. So the version passed on December, which no one possibly read. I know they didn't read it because it's too long. They couldn't conceivably read it. The lobbyists read it, though, don't worry. But the version that was passed, which no one actually read, had a lot of bugs and kinks and stuff. But they were going to work it out, okay? So they passed it. But something funny happened that prevented them from actually doing their plan. So the previous summer, Senator Ted Kennedy had passed away. And in January of 2010, about 2 weeks after that Christmas Eve vote, a special election was held in Massachusetts. Who's this guy? Scott Brown, right? Republican, right? Scott Brown ran for the Senate in Massachusetts on the promise of being the 41st vote to stop Obamacare. Let's say that again. A Republican in Massachusetts replaced Ted Kennedy as a 41st vote to kill Obamacare. That was stunning. It was, dare I say, unprecedented. Massachusetts had not elected a Republican in a long, long time. Okay? But because Scott Brown was elected, the Democrats lost their 60 vote block in the Senate. The second that bill comes back to the Senate chamber, it will be filibustered, dead, done. I mean, Ted Cruz wasn't there, but he was spoken for the entire 6 months straight. He would just shut the entire thing down. So, schoolhouse rocks, right? What do? Well, in theory, they could just send it to the House, and the House could just pass whatever version, the President could sign it, right? But no, that'd be too easy, because there were a lot of errors and bugs and kinks. And there were things in the Senate bill that the House didn't want. There was things like the corn plus or kickback. Louisiana Purchase, all these forms of graft to buy off moderate senators had to be stripped out because the constituency didn't want them. But usually, you know, if you make changes in one version of the bill, you know, you gotta make changes in the other house. Except, there's something called budget reconciliation process, right? Has anyone ever heard of the budget reconciliation process? I had never heard of it either before I wrote this book. So what this means is when a house is passing a budget, which is usually something that raises revenues, right? Taxes. When a house passes some sort of budget, they can make changes in one house, and they make changes in another house, and have this kind of reconciliation process going back and forth. But the key aspect of the reconciliation process is that it's not subject to the filibuster. Okay? You can make changes through this process without a filibuster. Now, this process was not meant for anything significant. It was meant for kind of little changes here and there, you know, maybe cross out this word, add this word. So what did the House Democrats do with the reconciliation process? They crossed out the entire 2,700-page bill and inserted a new 2,700-page bill. They rewrote the entire law. Now, there was substantial overlap. There's lots of similarities, but they really rewrote significant portions. And they never held one committee meeting. There were reconciliation meetings. They never held one meeting to reconcile it. So they effectively voted on a bill, right, that never actually passed the Senate. They treated that as the bill that was a law, and then sent it back to the Senate without the filibuster. If this is making your mind go crazy, then don't worry about it, because it makes no sense. By hook or crook, this was going to be the law of the land. Nothing was going to stop this, right? Okay? So it finally came up for a vote in the House of Representatives. Majority attention to two numbers. This one, 34 Democrats voted against it. Okay? A lot of those were given cover by Pelosi because she had no votes. But more important, I move my thing close up, it's a 0, right? That goose egg right there. Not a single Republican voted for this law. Not one. Now you can read that two different ways, right? You can say the Republicans are being intransigent, they were stubborn, they didn't want to support anything Obama wanted. That's fair, you can say that. That was their announced goal, they said as much. But you can also read this in another way. 50% of the country, actually 49.7% of the country, right, opposed this law from the outset. They didn't want it. They weren't invested in it. And if you go back in the 20th century, look at major pieces of law, the Social Security Act, the American Disabilities Act, the Civil Rights Act, any major law, they all had bipartisan support. Put it in perspective, more former segregationists voted for the Civil Rights Act than Republicans voted for the Affordable Care Act. Is it any wonder that so many Americans want to still kill this law a year and a half later? I didn't think this topic would have any salience when I wrote this law. But it keeps going, it keeps going. And you want to know what? It's going to keep going to the next election when the next round of cancellation notices is taken. So you need to keep this frame in your mind whenever you see why people so opposed to it, because you had no buy-in. This was a straight party line vote, which was frankly unprecedented. Thank you, God. It's like 1 o'clock in front time zone. Okay. So after this, this reconciliation process, the bill goes to the White House, and the president signs it. You can actually see here, it's kind of cool, the president uses these 23 commemorative pens, and he signs part of his signature with each pen, so each stroke is a different pen, and he hands them as souvenirs. Kind of a cool thing. And shortly after he signed the law, he made this comment, something to the effect of, the battle over healthcare reform is over. This was March 23rd, 2010. He goes, the battle over healthcare reform is over. No, not even close. We are now 4 years later. I'm writing a freaking sequel. Okay, this is not even close to being over. So what was the first barrier that the president and his healthcare law ran into? Of course, it was, the Constitution, right? Was this individual mandate constitutional? So let's do a mini common law lesson. All right. What case is this? Who wants to guess? Adam, don't raise your hand. What case is this? Ooh, come on, you guys got this.
Is it Wicker?
Yes, Wicker. What did Wicker hold?
I think it actually expanded the power. It was a Commerce Clause issue basically saying that the government had the power to, I can't remember because I probably read it 2 years ago too, but I think it just gave the Supreme Court wide breadth with regard to the Commerce Clause.
All right, so yeah, that's right. So here we have good old farmer Roscoe Philbin, right? He grew wheat for his own family, for his own chickens, right? He never sold on the market. And here the sinister-looking Secretary of Agriculture, Claude Wickard. See these graphs in the background of these 5-year plans, right? Claude Wickard said, hey, farmer, you can't grow that much wheat. Why? Well, because you're growing your own wheat impacts the interstate market for wheat. Huh? I'm growing my own wheat. It doesn't even leave my farm. The Supreme Court bought the argument and said, you know what? Your decision to grow your own wheat means you're not buying from the store. And because you're not buying from the store, that impacts the price of the market. Therefore, something within one state alone is interstate commerce. Okay. This effectively gutted the notion of wholly intrastate commerce. Everything any of you do is interstate commerce. Now, as anything you do, I mean you don't do. I'll get back to that in a minute. So now we have this expansive Commerce Clause power. Now this one's tougher. Who knows what case this is? Ooh. Give you a hint. What was this Shiva? Not Shiva. What is this thing? Shiva couldn't open her eyes much. What's this thing? Someone say it. Oh, in Minnesota. No one wants to say it. What is this thing?
Vaporizer.
Yes, a vaporizer. God, when I was even talking NYU, like, everyone was like, vape. That's my litmus. That's where I am. Okay, it's a vaporizer, right? What's a vaporizer used for? Yes, marijuana. So what case is this? Gonzalez
Right.
versus Raich. Remember the medicinal marijuana case? Okay. So this was a case actually argued by the guy who wrote the book, Professor Randy Barnett. Who you can't see him, he's a really cool guy. Gonzalez v. Raich was a case that was similar to Wicker. So you had poor Angel Raich. She had a very advanced tumor that was inoperable. And the only thing that gave her any form of relief was medicinal marijuana, which under California law was perfectly legal. But under federal law, it's not, unless you're now, I guess, in Colorado or Washington, and the Department of Justice decided not to prosecute you, but that doesn't really change the law. Anyway, so we have, remember that take care clause I mentioned? That hasn't gone yet. Yeah. So we have this situation, right, where Raich was using locally grown marijuana, being very organic, locally grown marijuana. Could the feds, pause here for this, could the feds regulate marijuana within the state line? This is a picture of her on the phone when she lost the case. She didn't win. So why didn't she win? Okay, so there were a couple main reasons. So the majority opinion was by Justice Stevens, who said that her decision to buy locally grown marijuana impacts the interstate marijuana market. What? Interstate marijuana market. I don't know what Justice Stevens was smoking when he wrote that, but I don't know what that is. But apparently there's an interstate marijuana market. But more interestingly was Justice Scalia, who had a concurring opinion on the necessary and proper clause. And what Eno said was, listen, Congress has the power to criminalize the drug trade, right? As a necessary and proper incident of that drug law, they need to be able to crack down on locally grown pot. Okay? So what this case basically stands for, even something that never leaves state lines, I mean the weed, the seeds, all would stay within one state, is not interstate commerce, and Congress would have broad powers to regulate it. Okay? So now we go from wheat to broccoli. Okay? Now, what I said before was that Congress can regulate anything you do, because everything you do has an impact on interstate commerce, right? But let's look at the mandate in a slightly different light. Is a mandate regulating activity? Well, in one sense it is. It's regulating the health insurance market, which is a multi-billion-dollar market that affects, was it 1/8 of the United States economy, okay? So I guess it's regulating commerce in that sense. But what's it really doing? It's penalizing individuals who are not doing something. If you choose not to buy health insurance, you're just sitting around doing nothing. You're sitting on your couch eating Doritos, okay? Can Congress regulate your decision to do nothing? Or stated in a different way, can Congress make you do something? Okay? They weren't just regulating your inactivity, they were injecting you into commerce through a penalty. We will penalize you unless you buy this health insurance. Okay? This is the argument that Randy Barnett and others came up with. And at first it was laughed at, it was scoffed at, every member of her faculty was said it's ridiculous. You know what? The argument took off. And it gained salience. So much so that it actually achieved this cultural relevance for broccoli, right? Because think about it, if Congress can make you buy health insurance to increase public health, can they also make you buy broccoli to become healthier? Or could the government make you buy a gym membership to become healthier? If the ultimate goal is to increase public health, what can't they do? What is your limiting principle, right? What can Congress not make you do? Say General Motors is going bankrupt. They say, okay, when you want to buy a car, you should buy a GM vehicle. If you buy a non-GM vehicle, you take with a $1,000 penalty. Okay. And they make you do that. So these are the constitutional backgrounds which I want you to think about going forward. But this is actually a signature. You see here the O, it's most visible, it's the jagged O. Anyway, so yeah, so March 23rd, 2010. This is the law of the land. I can't say that without laughing. Yeah. Whatever. He said this is the law of the land. The battle over healthcare reform is over. No. Okay? So within 17 minutes of that ink drying on that paper, we had a race to the courthouse. Not even a race. So you got two main suits, right? The first main suit was brought by the Attorney General of Virginia, former Attorney General of Virginia, Ken Cuccinelli. He's now no longer in office. And his successor just last week decided not to suspend the state's ban on same-sex marriage. You know, during his campaign he said nothing about that. But anyway, so we now have Ken Cuccinelli, who's now the former AG, and he brought a suit on behalf of Virginians, in which basically said, hey, you know, this law is unconstitutional. And you want to know what? Judge Henry Hudson in the Eastern District of Virginia bought his argument. This crazy off-the-wall argument that Congress can't regulate an activity got bought by a federal judge. And the president was not happy about this for a very simple reason. Every law professor in the world said this is an easy case, this is an easy case. And then when you start losing it for judges, you realize, wait a minute, this is serious business. By the way, the unpopularity of Obamacare continues to be unpopular, unabated. I mean, even now, it's not even above 50% to this day. Okay? But the main legal challenge was in Florida, where it's much warmer than it is now. So in Florida, you actually had initially a dozen states and ultimately 23 states come together. You imagine this, attorney generals from 23 to 24 states combined in one lawsuit to challenge an act of Congress. Not since the Civil War have we seen so much opposition to federal law. This was quite unprecedented, such a concerted effort to challenge this law. And this is Judge Fred Vinson. And remarkably, Judge Vinson found not only the mandate to be unconstitutional, he found the entire Affordable Care Act unconstitutional. All of it. He said you cannot sever the mandate from the rest of the law. The mandate was the heart of this law, operates like this fine Swiss watch, you can't separate it. Okay? So the president was not happy here, right? Because now in the biggest case in Florida with 23 states, you now had a federal judge saying that your law is unconstitutional. And there was an immediate appeals, there were appeals to the 4th, 6th, and 11th and DC circuits. Okay? Most of which we argue between then acting Solicitor General Neil Katyal and a GOP wonder boy, Paul Clement, who is perhaps one of the greatest Supreme Court advocates in a long time. If you ever want to hear some really good performance, go listen to his arguments. That's he should be emulating. He's immaculate. So anyway, the first case was actually argued in the Sixth Circuit. I clerked there, but I got there after this case was argued and decided. So what was interesting about the Sixth Circuit was you had a very prominent conservative judge, Judge Jeff Sutton, who actually ruled in favor of the government. Okay? So this showed that this wasn't a straight party line vote. They actually had some conservative judges who were find the mandate constitutional. So this is my happy Obama picture. He was happy with this one. But the next shoe to drop was a very big deal. Or to quote Joe Biden, it was a big effing deal, right? No, Joe. Everyone seen the State of the Union? Look at BuzzFeed, yeah. Anyway, actually, this big effing deal comes from Obamacare. He was on a hot mic at the press conference when they were signing Obamacare. He was like, President, this is a big effing deal. Biden. Joe. So, remarkably, in the 11th Circuit, the court found that the mandate was unconstitutional. You had a joint opinion from Judge Frank Hall, Frank the female, and Joel Dubina. And they found the mandate was unconstitutional. This was striking because now we have a circuit split, right? The 6th Circuit said it's constitutional, the 11th Circuit said it's unconstitutional. And what happens over a circuit split? Go up to north, where we go to Supreme Court. Okay? We gotta stop. This is my stopping Obama picture, okay? The next decision came out of the 4th Circuit in Richmond, Virginia, and this one I'll pause for a moment. So I've been talking about commerce, but there was another argument lurking in the background during the entire case, which is tax. Okay? So we all know the Constitution gives Congress the power to lay and collect taxes and spend it for general welfare. Okay? And we've all paid Social Security taxes. Every single paycheck you get, there's a little chunk cut off for Social Security tax. Okay? There's no problem with taxing people in that matter. Had the president decided to create some sort of single payer, where everyone just simply pays a tax to fund some sort of healthcare system, that would have been constitutional. That would have been like Medicaid for all. There would not have been a problem with that. But the president did not make this a tax. In fact, he went out of his way to call it not a tax many, many times. He kept saying, this is not a tax, this is not a tax, this is not a tax. He went national TV and said, this is not a tax. Okay? Members of Congress, the same, said, this is not a tax, this is not a tax, we're not going to raise your taxes. The statute itself does not use the word tax. It says, you shall maintain insurance, and if you don't, you pay a penalty. The word used is penalty. So what do you think the government did the second they went to court? What do you think they argued? It's a tax, right? And they tried to do this BS, oh no, the president never said it wasn't a tax, that it wasn't a tax increase. They tried to build this legerdemain with words, whatever. But the second they got into court, said, oh, it's a tax. Okay. But if it's a tax, there's a problem. So who here has actually heard of the Tax Anti-Injunction Act? I promise I won't bore you too much. The Tax Anti-Injunction Act, okay? This is this arcane law passed during Reconstruction that says if you're assessed a tax and you don't like it, you have to pay it and then sue for a refund. In other words, if you don't like your tax, you can't go straight to court. Courts won't even hear your case. This makes sense because we can imagine people saying, oh, I'm not going to pay my tax, I'll just litigate it for the next decade, right? So you pay your tax and you can seek a refund in court. If this law is a tax, when would anyone be paying it? Well, now, like 2014. No one would have paid the tax in 2010 when the suit was brought. Therefore, the case wasn't ripe yet before the black jurisdiction. So one of the government's early arguments was, if this is actually a tax, you can't hear it until 2014. Okay. That argument didn't go very far for one reason. All the lower courts, or nearly all the lower courts, consistently held this is not a tax. They clearly called this a penalty. The president said it's not a tax. It's not a tax, right? So the government actually kind of dropped that argument. But I think there's some political reasons also. What would have happened if they waited till 2014 and President Obama lost re-election? Do you think a Republican candidate would have ever defended the law? Would they have even said, yeah, it's a tax? No. So the president made a decision that we're going to push out the argument. We need the Supreme Court to resolve this June 2012, right before the election. Politics and the law here are so closely entwined. So what the court here did was they said, listen, the law is a tax, but because of the Anti-Injunction Act, we can't hear it right away. Okay? This was the only court of appeals to actually find the law was a tax. Okay? Obama will take it, whatever, I win, right? But shortly after this case was decided, we have a new Solicitor General. This is Solicitor General Don Verrilli. And he came on shortly before there was an argument to be had at the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. And the D.C. Circuit ruled in favor of the government. They upheld the law. But this is Judge Brett Kavanaugh. And Judge Kavanaugh had one sentence in his opinion that was very significant. This is really long tax case, right? But he said, if this law is a little bit different, right? If we change a couple words here and there, cross out the word shall, change the word penalty to tax, rewrite the law, it will be clearly constitutional. Because if Congress had passed this as a tax, there's no doubt it would have been fine. So Kavanaugh said, we're judges, right? We can read laws in order to save their constitutionality. Well, we just change a few words. This stuck in the craw of the Solicitor General. He said, you know what? That's a good argument. That's a good point. And we're going to make that argument. So happy Obama, the law was upheld, and now we have the circuit split, which goes up to the Supreme Court. Okay? And you can see them all here, all the justices, they're also happy and smiling and cheerful. But, anyone watch the State of the Union the other day? Anyone knows who wasn't there?
Scalia.
Oh, well, yeah, well, so who was there? So the chief was there, Kennedy was there, Ginsburg, Breyer, and Kagan. The five were there. So this guy wasn't there. So Scalia, Alito, and Thomas weren't there. They never go. And Justice Sotomayor was selling her books, so she didn't go either. Okay? Why didn't Alito go? Who remembers this? Who remembers what this is? So during the 2010 State of the Union, right? I thought they did a gift in here, right? During the 2010 State of the Union, okay? President Obama made some statements at the Citizens United case. He said that this case overturned 100 years of Supreme Court precedent, that it will open the floodgates to foreign spending, it will bring too much money into politics. By the way, which candidate benefited the most from Citizens United? Obama. Anyway, it doesn't matter, right? As the president was making these statements, which were wrong and actually conflicted with his own Solicitor General said, Justice Alito thought he was so at the Supreme Court, he forgot there were cameras, right? And a live camera focused him going, not true, to the president. So I think this is an interesting episode because it shows that President Obama was not afraid to criticize the courts. He was not afraid to go after the courts. Something that was really kind of trivial and not only didn't hurt him, actually kind of helped him, but I think you need to have this backdrop in your mind when you're deciding this case in June 2012, right before a presidential election. All right? So has anyone been to the Supreme Court? Good. Did you get tickets? You have to wait outside.
Not in the Supreme Court, but in Chambers.
So you got tickets?
Yeah.
So do you get tickets also?
Yeah.
Okay, so for us plebes who don't get tickets, right? The way in is by sleeping on the street. I've done this several times. It sucks, okay? Not quite as cold as here, but I did it once in March in, I guess, or McDonald's, this big gun case. I got there, I think, 8 p.m. the night before, and I spent the entire night on the sidewalk, okay? So here's a pro tip, okay? The sprinklers come on around 3 a.m. Wake up call. Anyway, so of course we have no cameras here. And so we have this entire circus outside the street. You can see the parks, because yes, it was raining and sleeting the entire week. The first person online was actually a single mother from Atlanta. She had 2 kids with disabilities. And she actually stayed online for 96 hours for the first one in there. So this was a significant case. And arguments were divided up into 3 days. Most cases have, an hour of argument. This case had almost 6 hours of argument. Right? So here's the breakdown. On day 1, the tax issue. Day 2, commerce. Day 3 was a doubleheader. In the morning, they talked about whether the mandate can be severed from the rest of the law. In other words, if the mandate is unconstitutional, can we cut it apart and save the rest of the law? Okay. The afternoon was actually on the Medicaid expansion, which I haven't mentioned yet. But part of what the ACA did was expand who can have access to Medicaid. So, and Angela will correct my numbers, I always get this wrong. But before the ACA, people at the poverty line were eligible. What the ACA did was raise it to 133% of the poverty line. Is that right? It's not. Okay. So basically expanded the number of people who can now have access to Medicaid, which is effectively government paid for insurance. A lot of the states objected to this for the simple reason that they thought it would bankrupt them. Now, the federal government would pay 100% for the next 4 years, whatever, and then 90% thereafter.
95, 98, 95.
Yeah, so basically the government.
Up to 2020.
Yeah, so basically the next decade, right, the feds would pay almost the entire cost of whatever the thing costs. But the state said, well, after that we'll be in trouble, okay? They challenged this. I'll get back to it later. So on the first day, people weren't paying much attention because who cares about the taxing power, right? Commerce is where it's at. That's the sexy thing. Everyone wants to talk about commerce, right? Taxes is where it's at. So the Solicitor General went up against Paul Clement. And the SG made a number of arguments that were very, very, very astute. So he made a couple points. So he said, first, Mr. Chief Justice, he's speaking right to the Chief, there is no mandate. The Solicitor General told the court, there is no mandate. What do you mean there's no mandate? We've been litigating over a mandate for almost 2 years. How is there no mandate? Well, Mr. Chief Justice, the way this law works is that there's a penalty on not having, I said it wrong. It's such a bad argument to use myself. There is a tax on not having insurance. I said it again. There's no penalty forcing you to buy insurance. There's only a tax on not having insurance. If you're scratching your head asking what the heck is the difference, right? What's the difference? The difference is the Constitution. Congress's power to enact a penalty to force you to do something is very narrow. Congress's power to impose a tax to make you conform to certain behavior is very broad. So what the government said was, this law is taxing people who don't have insurance. And because the taxing power is so much broader, the court can maybe uphold it. Everyone get that? It's a weird concept. Okay. But if it's a tax, Mr. Solicitor General, what about the Anti-Injunction Act, right? Didn't this Anti-Injunction Act say that you have to wait till a tax is imposed in 2014 before you can actually sue on it? Well, Mr. Chief Justice, for purposes of the Anti-Injunction Act, it's not a tax. So it's a tax for purposes of the Constitution, but it's not a tax for purposes of the Anti-Injunction Act. Everyone got that? The same law, which nowhere says it's a tax, the word penalty is used, is a tax for purposes of statutory construction of the Anti-Injunction Act, but it's not, but it is a tax for purposes of the Constitution. You know, I talked to a lot of government lawyers, and one told me this is a problem of semantics, right? This was the argument the court bought. Almost everyone missed it, but this was the argument the court accepted. That's how they're able to uphold the Affordable Care Act. By calling it a tax for purposes of the Constitution, but not a tax for purposes of the Anti-Injunction Act. That's it, right? That is what saved the law. The frickin' tax Anti-Injunction Act, okay? The most obscure thing which no one cares about. But everyone wasn't focused on the Anti-Injunction Act. They were talking about the Commerce Clause. And actually, on day 2 of the Commerce Clause, the SG got to a pretty rough start, okay? He had a bout with a glass of water, okay? What happened? He had done 6 moots the week before, and his voice was shot. So he took a glass of water, put it up to the podium, and it went down the wrong pipe. And that's happened to all of us, right? The dude couldn't breathe, okay? There were 6 seconds of silence on the audio as he tried to get a cup of water to kind of drink something. He recovered, right? We had a very tough uphill battle for a simple reason. He would not answer the important question, right? If Congress can make you buy health insurance, what can't they do? What is your limiting principle, right? Can they make you buy broccoli, right? Can they, let me get my broccoli. Yeah, here's my Scalia broccoli picture, right? Can they make you buy broccoli, right? Can they make you buy a GM vehicle? And the Solicitor General would not answer that question. That was actually a strategic decision that turned out not to work well, but he didn't want to back the government to a point, okay? So arguments were over. Pope Clement did a spectacular job, right? So after the case was done, everyone thought that Justice Voldemort would have the deciding vote, and he would just, sorry, Kennedy, and he would decide what would happen, right? But it wasn't Justice Kennedy. It would turn out to be Chief Justice Roberts. And we have to talk a little bit about the dynamics of what was going on during this time. Now, 3 days after the Supreme Court's conference, where they voted internally, the president gave a press conference, and he said, quote, "It would be unprecedented, I swear. It would be unprecedented for the court to strike this law down." Okay? The president said, "The court should exercise their jurisprudence carefully." The president said, "To strike this down will be like Lochner." Okay, you have the president talking about Lochner in the Oval Office. That's a big effing deal. Okay? Now, my friend Randy Barnett has gone so far as to accuse the president of trying to intimidate the court. I don't go quite that far, but Randy does. But there was definitely a pressure in Washington between the Supreme Court and the presidency to do something to uphold the law. And ultimately, and I talked about this in the book, the chief did make a decision to change his vote. So a lot of the reports you read are somewhat, I think, exaggerated. So my source of what I've heard was that at the conference, the Chief Justice was fairly set on the commerce power. But he was on the fence with respect to the taxing power. And at some point he said, you know what? I'm going to uphold this under the taxing power. And the other justices kind of reacted to it. This wasn't a case where at the very last minute the justices were scrambling, trying to write opinions. No, that didn't happen. They knew fairly on. Okay? And I can tell you also this information leaked from the court. And there were people in Washington in March and April who knew about this and were trying to wage a proxy battle to try and influence the Supreme Court as well. It didn't work. I think it actually backfired, in my opinion. Because in the end, the chief upheld the law. How did he do it? Exactly as the government told him to do it. He said, there is no mandate. There is no penalty. There's only a tax. There's only Zool. No. There's only a tax on those who choose not to have health insurance. It's a constitutional tax, but for purpose of the Anti-Injunction Act, it's only a penalty. This conflicts with everything anyone thought about the case. It conflicts with what the president said about his own law, and it really made a mockery of the entire litigation that it came down to this argument. He also made up parts of the opinion about the direct tax, he just made it up. But what we're left with is a law that was never written. The law the Chief Justice upheld was a law that Congress could never pass. Had they called it a tax, it would never made it to Congress. This passed by a slim vote. People in an election would have never upheld this, never voted for it was actually called a tax. The Chief Justice probably proposing the greatest tax increase in American history of this opinion. You might say he was being restrained, that he was moderate, that he was trying to hurt the democratic process, but the manner in which he did it involved upholding a law that Congress never wrote, which is a very, very striking power. So there was a joint opinion, in parts dissent, but not everybody dissent, by Justice Scalia, Kennedy, Thomas, and Alito, which were found the entire damn thing unconstitutional. They excluded one vote of killing the entire law. Okay? My man, Justice Thomas, would have voted to reverse the 20th century and just gut the entire legal court, just get rid of it all, bring back Darby. So interestingly enough, Justices Breyer and Kagan actually concurred on the part of the opinion discussing the Medicaid expansion. They basically agreed with the 5 other justices that The federal government can't force the states to accept this money, right? To force the states to accept this money is for coercion. Okay? States should have a choice. So a state has to effectively opt in to the Medicaid change. That's why in a lot of states right now, for example, where I live in Texas, we don't have it. So people in my state at the low end of the poverty level are significantly worse off than people perhaps in other states. And I'm sure Angela will talk about that in a few moments. Justices Ginsburg and Sotomayor said uphold the entire thing. And that was that. That was the case. But actually, the theatrics of the case are even more fun. So, because there are no cameras in the court, the media totally screwed this one up. They just blew it. And so there's this great scene, right? So how did the people, the reporters in the street get the opinion? You have these interns in sneakers running, you know, with a copy of the opinion in their hand. Because, by the way, the Supreme Court's website went down. Preview of things to come, right? The Supreme Court's website is totally unavailable on this issue there, right? So you have these kids, you know, with the opinions in their hand, running. And they hand it to Kate Baldwin, who's a CNN reporter. And I have the video, I can show it to you later. And she's going, Wolf, she's going, Wolf, Blitzer, Wolf. She's looking at page 3 of the opinion. Wolf, it says here, the Chief Justice found that the Affordable Care Act violates the Commerce Clause, right? And then Wolf Blitzer went wall to wall, mandate struck down, right? Guess who was watching CNN? Yeah, the press was watching CNN. And Fox did the same thing. They totally blew it, right? Had Kate Baldwin turned to page 4 of the sentence, right? She would have seen where it says, but the court applies a saving construction and upholds the law. So they were so quick to run with it that they totally blew it, right? This is our Dewey defeats Truman of the 21st century, right? Anyway, happy Obama, right? This is really happy Obama. This is when he gave an interview to Rolling Stone saying, you know what? Let's call this Obamacare. This is my legacy. And he's since stripped that word from his entire social media presence. And I do have the screenshots to show you. We're there, I promise. So, I think the Solicitor General got a really bum rap. He gagged and choked, made the winning argument. He took a lot of risks, but ultimately he won. The Chief Justice sliced and diced. We still don't know why he did what he did. I'll never know what's in his heart of hearts. But I think we can study this decision for some time to come. He was attacked vociferously. He was led basically by Glenn Beck and others. Okay. Then we have a presidential election. Of course, we have Mitt Romney, who effectively invented Obamacare in Massachusetts. Every single debate between the president and Romney, I never noticed this, but he always wears a red tie. He wears a blue tie. This just occurred to me recently. Okay. Every single debate between the two of them. Whenever healthcare was brought up, Obama would go, hey, Romney Care is the godfather of Obamacare. He could not win this battle. He would lose. And I used to actually end my talk here, say that the defeat of President Romney would be the end of the Obamacare repeal battle. That was wrong. Anyway, this is inauguration number 3. Anyway. So yeah, this is the last slide. Saying, you know, the Chief Justice, you know, the President Obama is looking forward. He only has 3 years left to his presidency, and you know, there's so much to do, and so many executive orders to sign, and so many things to whatever. And the Chief Justice is looking forward at the future. He realizes he has probably 30 years left. He wants to be the next John Marshall, right? That's where I used to end my talk right here. But you guys get the director's cut now. So then this happened, right? My beloved junior senator, Ted Cruz, reading to his children Green Eggs and Ham on the Senate floor during his 22-hour filibuster over Obamacare. And I forgot this already. Remember this? Right? Remember our federal government shut down over Obamacare? Remember the barricades? And then this was just a prelude, of course, to the website, right? The entire healthcare.gov website. This is poor Adrienne. Poor Adrienne. She's been bullied and harassed over this website. She didn't even get paid for taking this picture. She actually wanted free headshots, so she volunteered her face for free headshot. She's not even a citizen. I think she's looking for a visa, and she's gotten serious backlash. People found out this her. Anyway, poor Adrienne. But as we know, poor Adrienne. I feel bad for the girl. She did not see this coming, right? So what happened? Yeah. So when the website launched, you know how many people managed to sign up on the first day? 6. 6 people signed up on day number 1. In fact, there was this funny SNL skit where they were joking that today less than 10 people signed up, right? And that was actually accurate. Okay? So the website did not turn out so well. There was massive downtime. People just waiting and waiting. And the president set this self-imposed deadline of December 1st to try to fix it. And you know what? They did. For the most part, the thing's working now. There's still going to be some bugs. The problems when people thought they signed up and didn't, and they try and go get benefits and denied, that's going to be a big problem next year. But the more fundamental problem, is what I call the biggest lie of the entire Affordable Care Act. This entire promise that if you like your insurance, you can keep it, right? This was a lesson learned from the defeat of Hillary Care. If you like your insurance, you can keep it. Everyone said it. Your Klobuchar said it. Franken said it. They all said it. And this was a lie. And anyone who knows how healthcare policy works knows this is not to be kept. Why? The way the Affordable Care Act works is to make policies and costs even across a risk pool, right? The only way for this to happen is for some people to get new policies. Also, when employers are now responsible for providing health care, they're going to need to include certain benefits, what's called essential coverage. They might decide, we don't want to give this to you, we'll just let you go onto the exchange and buy it from the state exchange, right? Millions and millions of people are going to have to change their policies. Now, maybe the new policies are better, they have more benefits, whatever, but this is not how people are sold in the law. Next year, when the employer mandate kicks in, there might be many millions more who are now going to be kicked off their plans, okay? You've had Kathleen Sebelius testify before Congress. The politics of this law are really going to kick in next fall when people start getting the cancellation notices. Okay? A brief note on the Hobby Lobby case. So this is what's called the contraceptive mandate case, right? So part of the Affordable Care Act says you need to provide essential coverage. And HHS has defined essential coverage to include certain kind of contraceptives, abortifacients, sterilization procedures. And there are a number of religious employers like Hobby Lobby. It's a privately held company, but their employers are very religious, who believe that their corporations actually they exercise the religious beliefs. They've actually brought a constitutional challenge. This will be argued next month at the Supreme Court, and this could have serious ramifications for not only Obamacare, but also the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. So I shall close with this, and I'll leave you with the understanding that this battle is not over. That zero, right, of 0 Republicans, we're going to be fighting this law. They're going to be fighting this law for a very long time to come. And for better or worse, it's not going to help the law's success. Probably for the worse. There are going to be probably proposals to reform it or make it better. But I think we're going to see a non-stop war that probably going to make it very difficult to law to succeed. And I thank you so much and welcome comments from Angela. Thank you so much.
Anyone has any questions that they've written down? We'll come around and grab those.
That's funny.
But I read it, I put an arrow too, right?
Give everybody a minute to get situated. Gotta go to class, don't be offended. All right, I'll just get started with my introductory comments. Wow, well done. That was phenomenal. What a great history that was. That's a tough act to follow. All right, well, I'm Angela, as you know. I haven't given this presentation before, but I'm honored to have been asked to come and talk a little about local policy. So I'll give you another second to get situated. I have 100 comments for you, but there's just not enough time. So it was a wonderful presentation. Let me say a few thoughts that came to my head. My success story, I lost my coverage. I didn't get to keep my plan. And guess what? I got a new one and a better one for a better price. So I have a success story, and a lot of other people do. Minnesota has the lowest rates on the individual market in the state. So if you're out there and you need to buy a policy for yourself, Minnesota, awesome, great prices. So we are actually kind of in a league of our own. Another kind of thought that comes to mind after Josh's fantastic presentation, go read the opinion, all right? You can see the court, as I remember, lays out all the arguments so well, the history so well, and you can see both sides of the coin. have to intersect with the delivery system at some point. You will consume resources at some point. So your inaction could actually be translated into an action of choosing not to buy insurance but still interacting with the market. So I'm not articulating it particularly well, but there's a whole other side to the story here, and those arguments are presented very well in my opinion. So, a couple more introductory housekeeping comments. Just want to tell you again, I'm so happy to be here. It's such an honor. I know we all braved such a terrible drive-in this morning, so good job, you braved it. And then I actually had the pleasure of seeing the Vulcan crew this morning from the St. Paul Winter Carnival. You know who they are. I was sitting up in the library this morning, recovering from my horrible drive-in, and there they were, driving along. So kind of fun. Go to the Winter Carnival if you haven't yet. I'm going to try to do that too. All right, so I want to have a dialogue to some extent. This is quasi-formal. I've got just a short time with you guys. Let's have a little bit of engagement if we can, maybe if not during, then after. I'll take your questions if you have them for me. I may defer to the end, and I may defer to my expert colleagues. I'm not necessarily an expert in local health policy, but I'm bringing to you some perspectives that I have. All right, so what are we going to do? We're going to talk about ethics. All right, we don't talk about ethics in law particularly much. I'm an ethicist and a lawyer. I do ethics. We're going to do an ethical analysis together, a mini analysis. All right. Where am I from? I work at the Minnesota Center for Healthcare Ethics. All right, as my bio said, as Suzula indicated, I work for Fairview, Health East, and the Sisters. All right, I work for a variety of hospitals around town, do all different types of consulting, a whole variety of issues. All right, and so it's our 20th anniversary, which is very exciting for the center, and I've been working there for 6 years. I'll have you know, I started volunteering there my second year in law school, so on and so forth. What happens. So good job to all of you who are starting your professional careers. See where it takes you over the next 5 years. All right. And then I'm not sure if my bio mentioned it, but I also teach on the side at St. Catherine. And I'm hoping to see 1 or 2 of my former students here. All right. So what are we going to do? We're going to do an ethical analysis. I'm going to buzz through this fairly quickly. All right. Josh talked a lot about the history of the litigation. We're going to talk about why. Why the Affordable Care Act? What prompted it? What was underlying it? Well, ethical goal, all right? As a society, we have an ethical goal here. The ethical goal is to expand coverage, give people adequate access to an adequate amount of services. That's one of the underlying ethical goals under the Affordable Care Act. Okay? So what are we going to do? Our mini ethics analysis is going to see how far are we? Our goal is over there. How far did the policy, the Affordable Care Act, get us to reaching that goal? And to do that, we have to talk about what's going on locally. All right. So, how do you do an ethical analysis? Well, we're going to do the abbreviated format. As an ethicist, what you do is you generate an ethical framework for the particular situation that you're working for. What's an ethical framework? It's based upon a series of ethical principles. What are some ethical principles underlying the Affordable Care Act? Equality of opportunity, right? That's one. Compassion, justice, those types of things. So what have major organizations been saying since 1948 about healthcare? What are some of our ethical guidance or ethical frameworks? Well, the Declaration of Human Rights talks about it. A variety of medical associations have consensus statements. Catholics have all sorts of things to say. I do Catholic healthcare consulting, so I can include them. And the President's Commission. So, we all know what the UN Declaration on Human Rights says. Fundamental human rights to health care, right? That's pretty straightforward. That was back in 1948, okay? So our first flavor is chocolate, okay? Then strawberry, this is our spumoni of ethical guidance. American Medical Association, what do they have to say? Well, they're somewhat self-interested, as my husband reminded me last night. But every member of society needs to have an adequate array of core health benefits. Catholic Health Association says something similar. Human dignity necessitates access to adequate health care. All right, is coverage in healthcare similar? I talk about both coverage enables coverage and access. Coverage enables access to some extent. So I'm kind of using them a little bit interchangeably. All right, I'm going to read what the Catholic Health Association says because I want you to get the whole picture. What do they 2013, they've been saying this for years. As a matter of human dignity, everyone is entitled to health care. Like any basic element in life, healthcare sustains us and should always be accessible and affordable for everyone. Where they need it, when they need it, no exceptions, no interruptions. We believe that healthcare is a basic human right. To that end, healthcare should be considered an essential building block for a just and free society, just as education is. Okay? We're going to move away from the Catholic perspective and we're going to talk about the U.S. President's Commission. This is a commission back in the 1980s that has a terribly long name.
Commission for the Study of Ethical Problems in Medicine, Biomedical, and Behavioral Research. They promulgated a report to the Congress in 1983, the year that I was born. It's scary. What did they have to say? Well, this commission concluded that society has an ethical obligation to ensure equitable access to health care for all. It's kind of a recurring theme, right? Equitable access to health care requires that all citizens be able to secure an adequate level of care without excessive burdens. That's what the commission has been saying all the way back since 1983. It hasn't been renewed, it hasn't been changed. This is the authoritative perspective. What do they call themselves now? Well, in case you're interested, they call themselves the Presidential Commission for the Study of Biological Issues. And they have all sorts of great policy briefs on everything from embryonic stem cell research to human subject research. Okay, so we've kind of done a very brief tour. And look at that. A very brief tour of some ethical guidance from 1948 to today. What is it all saying? Equitable access to adequate health care through expansion and coverage. That's our goal. All right, what this should be is an American football goal post in honor of the Super Bowl on Sunday. Okay, I got the wrong kind of goal here. All right. So I told you at the outset, Minnesota is awesome. Why is Minnesota awesome? What do we have? We have Minnesota Care. You ever heard of that? That is coverage, state coverage for people who are the working poor, who don't qualify for medical assistance. We are the first, we're the most exciting state because we have Minnesota Care. All right? Some of you may very well qualify or have qualified for Minnesota Care in the past. We are the leader of the pack. All right? I'm not sure which of these is the leader, but they're both my dogs and they're cute. My animals in every presentation, and I do. We are the leader of the pack. Back in the 1990s, we made a specific expansion of coverage for our low-income working populations. We demonstrated our state commitment to these ethical principles, all right? Very big deal. Taught to anybody back in who was around back in 1992. Big deal. And we're still very proud of it today. All right, so I'm just going to remind us of our goals before we talk about what's actually going on in Minnesota right now today. So my question for you again is, how far have we moved along our continuum to reach our goal in our state of Minnesota? It's different than Arizona and Texas. All right, this is where I'm going to give you my master disclaimer, all right? I don't work specifically in healthcare policy implementation here in Minnesota, but I have a lot of colleagues that do, and they do consulting kind of at the 10,000-foot level. So if I'm getting a little bit of this wrong, I'll apologize in advance. I'll take your questions and I'll refer you to the resources. It's all online. I have great references for this. So we have to figure out where we stand in order to answer our question. We have to do a review of ACA-related changes happening in Minnesota over the last couple of years, but also in the last 30 days. All right? 1/1/14, a really important day in our history. Medicaid expansion, individual mandate. Josh talked about them a little bit. All right? Big deal. We've got 30 days worth here of a new baby law that's growing and being implemented. So, what's going on in Minnesota? I'm just going to read a couple of these slides for you. We are going to have our uninsured population numbers decline by 60%. That's awesome. Medical assistance. This is the Medicaid expansion. We call it medical assistance here. Guess what? It's going up to 133% of the FPG. You can look that up and see how it's calculated. Income limit for children. All right, children are going to get coverage in MA up to 275% of federal poverty guidelines. This is not an exhaustive list of changes going on in coverage. You can look it up. Go online to the state website, the DHS, Department of Human Services, and you can see what
coverage expansion is, and see where you fall. All right, Minnesota Care, we just talked about that. What's going on with Minnesota Care? Well, in the Affordable Care Act, or the ACA as we call it, there's something called the Basic Health Plan. This is a plan that was designed to help people who are Minnesota Care population, all right? Because other states don't have Minnesota Care, so they had to come up with something to help people who fall between medical assistance and effectively the working poor. We already have a basic health plan. It's called Minnesota Care, and it's just getting bigger and better now because we now have some federal dollars that we can in 2015. So what's going on with Minnesota Care? Well, guess what? The asset limit is eliminated. It used to be $10,000, not a whole lot. There's no longer a limit on inpatient hospital stays, all right? If you were on Minnesota Care before, if you had a hospital stay that cost you more than $10,000, which generally would happen, you'd have a problem because you wouldn't have coverage. That's all going away now, all right? And then, as we discussed before, there's premium tax credits. I was talking with a couple students before. So if you're not eligible for MA or Minnesota Care, but you still have an income that's lower than 400% of the federal poverty guidelines, you can get some premium assistance for that. You gotta go on a MNsure, you have to apply. You're still gonna have to pay some toward your premium, but you're gonna get a little bit of subsidization for that. So this is very exciting, and this affects all of you, all of us, together. Okay, so immigrants. Why am I talking about immigrants specifically? Well, as an emphasis, immigrant populations are very important to me. Vulnerable populations in particular, undocumented patients. Major problem here in Minnesota. What do we do about that? So what's going on? What are some changes for immigrants? Another disclaimer, go talk to the immigration lawyers in town. Go to the immigration law clinic. They've got all the details on what's going on with immigrants. But some key things that I want to impress upon you. There is some expanded coverage for lawfully present immigrants. I'm not even going to try to define what lawfully present means because I just don't really know.
But I also know that it's very important that no longer do you have to include your sponsor's income to get expanded coverage.
But we have kind of a problem here. There's still a bunch of people that are left out of the system. Who are they? They're the undocumented immigrants. They are the people that St. Mary's Health Clinic serves. St. Mary's Health Clinic operates under the same building as I do. And it's a very important safety net mechanism because this population doesn't have any coverage. And they certainly don't have any coverage, and they certainly don't have very much access. So what do? They have to go to the safety net system. Again, I'll just remind you, this is a 50,000-foot overview. There's so much to say and think about here. So let's talk about what's going on with our safety net system. We've just talked about coverage changes. Now we have to figure out how is access changing for people who don't have coverage. What do we do for them here in Minnesota? Well, we have kind of a patchwork network. Community health centers, one thing. Free clinics. Hospitals have to provide charity care and community benefit. And then there's such a thing as emergency medical assistance. So how does the ACA affect those things? All right. Are you familiar with any community health centers around town? You heard of the Phillips Neighborhood Clinic? Have you heard of the Neighborhood Health Source? Southside? No? Some of you. Yeah, the public health people have, right? We have community health centers, all right? These are organizations that are really intended to help out these populations, these underserved populations. What's going on with them? Well, guess what? Luckily, some of their clients are getting specialty care coverage, which they never had before. A lot of their populations are now getting covered under MA or Minnesota Care, and they're actually getting access to diabetes care, chronic care, management, all sorts of great stuff. But we still have this one group that's left out, unfortunately. The Affordable Care Act has prioritized community health centers. They're giving them a lot more federal investment, getting a lot more community health centers. They're going to expand their services. They're including dental care to some extent, which never was even in the picture before. Mental health care. Great stuff is going on with community health centers. If you want to learn more, you can Google it. You can talk to some people. I've got great contacts around town here. All right, and then they've got FUN, F-U-H-N. And I just say it because it's kind of fun. It's a demonstration project. It's a Medicaid accountable care organization. It's going on here in town. I'm I'm just gonna mention, I'm not gonna describe it. But just so you know, we've got some really cool innovative projects going around here in town. So if you're in the health law field, if you're going into health law, you might have going into public policy, this is the kind of stuff you wanna know about. Alright, trying to keep it quick here. Alright, community benefit. I told you that hospitals have to provide community benefit, right? Well, we all know about EMTALA. You show up at the ER and they have to at least stabilize you. So, what's going on with community benefit? The Affordable Care Act requires now that hospitals get together, they figure out what their service area is, and they do what we call a community health needs assessment. And then consequently, they implement that assessment. So, for example, the Amplatz Children's Hospital and UMMC Fairview, remember over there, been there before, right, on the U of M campus, they did their assessment and they figured out that, well, mental health and heart disease are the two biggest areas in their populations that they serve. So what are they doing? They're partnering with different organizations in town to try and improve those, and minimize those conditions and prevent those conditions. Specifically, they're partnering with, for example, Minnesota Department of Health, YMCA, to implement cool initiatives to help reduce those disparities. Alright, charity care. What's charity care? Well, hospitals provide a certain amount of free care, uncompensated care, to people that just show up in their doors. Alright? In 2011, that was on the order of $150 million. Charity care is financed through a variety of mechanisms. However, we know that the charity care is expected to decline because more people are going to get covered. Just a side note. Alright. So, knowing what we know now about local stuff, local changes to coverage, local changes to the safety net, can we make some sort of an assessment? Have we reached our goal? How far are we to reaching our goal? Do we now have equitable access to adequate health care? We're getting there, we're getting closer, right? We've made progress, but there's more work to do. There just is, from an ethics perspective, right? So what else do we have to do? Well, this might start sounding a little bit partisan, as I've been told, but this is what the experts in town recommend. What are we supposed to do to get closer to our ethical goal? Well, we can advocate for expansion of coverage to people who are effectively out of the system. We can persevere with MNsure, all right? MNsure is our exchange. MNsure has a lot of technical problems. They are technical problems, not necessarily problems with the foundation of policy. Get informed, all right? That's why you're here. Educate others, get informed. Outreach to people, outreach. That's what we keep hearing. President Obama, what was it, Tuesday night, said, that's why tonight I ask every American who knows someone without health insurance to help him get covered on March 31st. Okay? Outreach. Read about it, think about it, and outreach to people. Alright, I want to give you just a couple more thoughts here as we go from the people that I had a chance to interview in preparation for this presentation. Unfortunately, we do have a failure in principle, a failure on an ethics ground, and that's to leave out undocumented populations. I firmly believe that's a failure. That is perhaps a political question. We have some serious failures in practice here in Minnesota, and certainly elsewhere, perhaps more elsewhere. We have lack of information and misunderstanding about the Affordable Care Act. It's not hard to imagine because it's extremely complicated. But you're law students, you're sophisticated, you should develop a baseline level of understanding. Go on to KaiserFamilyFoundation.com. We've got a ton of great resources that are really easy to understand. Alright, but we need to keep calm because you know what? It's just a baby law. The big part of it, it's only 30 days old. MNsure is still relatively young, so we have some time to work through some of these issues. Alright. What can you guys do besides reading, learning, and getting educated? You can connect with some of these organizations that have a stake here at William Mitchell. You probably have more here at William Mitchell. Connections to these organizations. Take action. Immigrant Law Center in Minnesota. Minnesota Budget Project. Portico. Mid-Minnesota Legal Aid, alright? Get connected. Join these groups. Learn what they're doing. Get involved. Contact me. Alright. I want to extend a very special thank you to the people, particularly that I consulted with in preparation for this presentation. All right, there, let's see here, and we'll go through specifically. I'd like to thank Josh sponsors, the societies, the network.
That's a cute dog. I have a dachshund at home. I don't bring any picture of her though. She's very cute. She's a wiener dog.
Oh,
All right,
cute.
I have as much time as I want for questions. You have to go for class, please, but I welcome any of your questions.
Yeah, and the index card thing didn't really happen, so just shoot them out if
Shoot
you have
'em past.
questions.
Take advantage.
In the back?
I have a question, and I think I'd like to get both of your takes on this. From you, I heard a lot about, our goals and how we're moving forward with that. And from you, I heard a lot about the law. But my biggest thing is that even if we enjoy the underlying goal of providing health care and giving health care to everybody, does the end necessarily define the means of how we're going about it? Like, is there a middle point where we give people access to health care, but not in this way? That is penalizing other people who don't have health care or who want to stay with their current policies, etc.
You go first.
Oh, thank you. All right. Well, I don't know if I agree with the grand design of the individual mandate and the tax penalty or the tax penalty or whatever it is. But I do understand that an individual mandate is really an essential component. As Josh said, you kind of have to spread the risk across the population, so they want everybody to get coverage so that the insurers can then keep the prices down and so forth. There may be a better way to do this, and Minnesota, I'll just say, has been a great laboratory for that. We've already extended coverage through Minnesota Care and other means without imposing a legal duty or so. So it's a great question. I'd say get involved in the process and try and help advocate for a better system.
So I'll take it with a historical perspective, and thank you for that answer, and those kind comments about my talk. I think you need to look at how this law was sold, right? You can't get past the fact that it was passed on a straight party line basis on a set of promises that proved to be totally false, and that people knew to be false. And I'm glad you're a success story, but there are many people who aren't success stories, and they're going to be, there was actually a piece in National Review this morning by a guy named Jeff Singer, who's an adjunct at Cato. And it basically says that if you calculate the number of people who are actually positioned that they're getting denied coverage for the pre-existing conditions, there's roughly 1% of the population. 3 million people, give or take. These are government numbers. And if you look at the number of people who've had their policies canceled for the worst, give or take 5 million, right? If you had just wanted to help those 3 million people, you could have done it for a few $billion. But to quote Jeff Singer, instead we dropped $1 trillion bomb on our healthcare market, and which will do a lot of other things. It's going to do a lot of things, and some wonderful things for the groups that Angela mentioned. But this was not how the law was sold. So to the extent that the law has sustained viability, you can't forget the past. And I think that informs it, because we have trade-offs in society, right? I'm sure we'd love to help everyone, but it comes at a price. And perhaps there were ways to help the vulnerable without having to uproot the entire thing. Maybe there were, maybe there weren't. I mean, people I know don't even like the mandatory. You said you're not a particular fan of it. I don't know what the ideal mechanism was, but if you wanted to actually reform healthcare in a process, Minnesota's an example. They spent, the entire state came together, they spent many years talking about it, versus a slapdash manner, just throwing together at the last minute, changing this, changing that, delaying this provision here, delaying that provision a year. It's almost like governed by ad lib. And this is not how, it's a month-old baby, but this is not an auspicious start yeah.
Yeah, so I hear from you, so this is a question specifically for Josh. I hear from you two sides here. One where people don't like this law because of how it was passed. And the party line, the zero Republicans, Pelosi jamming it down people's throats. But then you look at a more unsophisticated people, like just your general Tea Party population, and I get the feeling they don't like it because they hate health insurance, or they hate poor people, and they don't want to cover someone else's bill, they don't want to pay for my birth control, whatever. So what I want to know is, moving forward now, because all these things have happened, and they've happened, we have to accept that. So moving forward, if we have a Republican president after Obama, or if, you know, there's this big sea change in politics after the next election, what are the Republicans gonna do, and is it worth it? And what happens if they repeal it? What happens to the rest of us who are now on MA because of 133% of the poverty line? Like, what, do I go back to the individual line? Like, what would possibly
Right,
happen?
so I think your question's premised on some that some people don't share that the Tea Party is sophisticated, they want to do this and that. I don't share those presumptions. But the problem we have is one of entrenchment, right? Obama knew this, close to this. This is why they said we just have to get through the first year. So when we get the first year, people are relying on it. And it becomes very difficult to get rid of something that people are relying on. Now, the answer is it impossible to repeal an entitlement to people like? Well, there's precedent for that. For example, there was a catastrophic Medicaid in the late 80s, what was it called? There was a thing passed in the late 80s, this catastrophic Medicaid thing that was meant to help seniors, but in fact it raised rates for everyone. And they repealed it after 2 years. Okay? I think that's perhaps a pipe dream. But there are various plans, and actually last week, Senators Coburn, Hatch, and one other senator, Republican senators, released plans of how to affect this. For example, it would strip out the employer mandate. It'd strip out parts of the individual mandate. It would create these high-risk pools to take care of the smaller people who couldn't get coverage. States would still be free to offer this expansion if they wanted to. So there are ways of bringing this more in line with what people expected without having to adjust the market this much. But I think this is the story of why they try to jam down people's throats. If we just pass it, opposed to we'll pass the bill to find what's inside of it. You have to pass it, you work the consequences later. And putting this on healthcare, that's a very poor form of government. Back, there we have.
So, and this might be a lack of understanding about the act itself, but my understanding is that part of what the ACA is doing is making insurance rates for healthy individuals more equal, whereas before, essentially being a woman was a pre-existing condition. Because you could get pregnant, so therefore you were penalized by insurance costs for something that benefits the whole of society. So is that something that you think the Republicans are going to try to take a stab at?
Oh, stab it, unfortunately, terrible. Yeah. So I mean, look, the issue is health insurance, like any insurance, has to be actuarially priced, right? It's based on risk, okay? And some people have higher costs than others. And there are ways, and there are other ways of formulating risk pools to make it that people with pre-existing conditions can receive various subsidies, right? If your main goal, and I'm not a health policy wonker, so I'm not that good at the question to answer,
Yeah.
crap in. But if your main goal is to treat people with pre-existing conditions, right? If that was the main goal, and that's basically what the President said at the State of the Union, there are ways around that other than what the ACA did, right? The employer mandate, and we can argue about this, but the employer mandate and other aspects of this, we're trying to change the entire system in many respects. We're trying to accomplish very wide-ranging changes. So if the goal was only pre-existing conditions, that there are other ways. Angela, tell me
Yeah, I'm gonna comment on a prior question, actually, even though it wasn't directed to me. I think some of it comes down to just kind of the culture and the environment of a particular state you're going to. I mean, as I've mentioned, Minnesota is very unique in a lot of ways. So how we feel about, say, the individual mandate and other things, just be aware that it's slightly different because of our cultural perspective and our history too.
And I
It's
think,
just
I think,
another perspective.
and I think the culture is an important issue, right? If this had been something that had been talked about in America for a few years, right, and actually debated, then we'd have a different story. But it wasn't. You know, this was meant to be passed before Scott Brown was elected, or whatever. It was meant to be passed on a very quick basis because the support wasn't there. So actually, I think a survey was done in 2008, and roughly 80% of Americans were happy with their health insurance. And I'm sure those 20% were probably pretty unhappy, right?
That's if they had it.
Right. I'm sure that 20% of people perhaps didn't have insurance. But the overwhelming majority of people who had it were happy with it. And those people who were mostly voting for it. So if you want to tell people who are happy with their insurance that they have to change it, and that's really the nature of the debate. If you want to talk about medical ethics, we have a duty to our fellow people to have insurance. I think that's an important debate to be had. But the entire premise of this is, you'll keep what you have, this won't impact you, and that was not true.
You know, I'm sorry, I just think you're focusing on a couple of things. First of all, it's not true that the only reason was for pre-existing conditions. It's to get access to everything. Someone like me could not get insurance. I couldn't even pay for it because they have what's called 2 months before December. I couldn't even get a temporary plan because I had to pre-qualify. Well, if I have diastolic heart dysfunction, or if I've ever seen a counselor, and that's been true for me for 40 years. My graduate work was in counseling, but if I'd ever seen a counselor, I was automatically disqualified from health insurance. That's been going on for a long time. And the whole thing about the risk rules, I mean, the way our country's set up, it's all based on profit-making companies anyway. And Minnesota's one of the few that finally said what I think is true in France, which is that if you're providing basic health care, like the HMOs, you cannot be for profit. I mean, there's so many things wrong with this health insurance, and just really never shut up about it. But the thing of it is this act, however pain, was not just based on one promise that wasn't kept. I realized that the way it worked constitutionally was kind of a train wreck. But I'm glad for something, because what would really work would be a national health insurance program. That was never going to pass. And finally, I don't think that zero Republicans, there's been not as much media about Republicans not representing what their constituents feel, because there is definitely more than 50% who like this act.
Yeah, so actually another study was done that there is a significant portion that actually prefer single payer. And so the unpopularity numbers include people who don't like this, a lot of liberals like it as well. Yes, ma'am, with the glasses.
So I'm just wondering if we can go back to kind of what you were saying about the constitutionality argument. I guess I have, it's like a two-part question, basically. If you have, like basically a rebuttal about that, or what your opinion on that is, if you believe that it is a violation of the Constitution. And if it is, I mean, ideally, it sounds great that everybody should have this coverage, and, you know, I think that on paper it sounds really good, but if it's a question of the constitutionality and you'll accept that, then I guess my thought is, or question, is how can we reconcile the fact that, you know, I mean, we live and breathe this document, and that's what essentially our laws are based on, and how we can reconcile the idea of a law being passed, you know, with, you know, outside of the confines of the Constitution.
Right, so I mean, again, my book is mostly about common law. I talk about health policy in a couple of pages just to try and summarize the issue. But the constitutional aspect of this law was something that people didn't think about when they were passing this, right? When they were debating this law in Congress, the Constitution was not on their minds. In fact, they said we need to help people. This was their goal. And it was only at the very last minute that a couple of common law professors insisted they put on what were called constitutional findings of why this law is constitutional. Those are added in like the last possible minute to try and give some basis to uphold the law. The arguments that ultimately came to destroy the ACA were only formulated shortly before the law was passed. And I know this sounds crazy, but the entire activity-inactivity distinction was not even in the forefront of constitutional thought until right after the law was actually enacted. And I think this is a tribute to what some might call popular constitutionalism, the idea that when you have a constitutional ideal that is accepted by large swaths of the population, that it gains salience, that these are people who make arguments that are initially off the wall, the arguments come on the wall as it goes forward. And it's remarkable in the span of 2 years how constitutional law evolved and changed in a way that almost gutted this entire law, came from one vote of destroying it. My own personal view is I was very conflicted with this. I actually thought the constitutional arguments were very compelling, but I was very nervous about the president and what would happen if the court struck down his law in an election year. And I have a very high respect for the court and its legitimacy, and I had every expectation the president would go and start criticizing the court and calling it a lock-in court and illegitimate, and it should be doing this, and that damage to the court worried me more, in truth, than whatever damage the ACA does. And I actually was worried about how the court would be treated afterwards. So I was very nervous about the court striking this law down, because I did not want to see an FDR style run on the court. I did not
Yeah, but
want
that
to.
shouldn't be the reason that the court rules one way or the other. The court should rule based on merits and interpreting.
Well,
Constitution
one day
merits.
maybe we'll have a private conversation with the Chief Justice and we'll find out what's in his heart of hearts. but the legal merits of the case. So I didn't go through this, but the Chief Justice's opinion spent 30 pages talking about why it violates the Commerce Clause. Because, oh, by the way, it's a tax, right? He called it a saving construction. Generally, when you find something unconstitutional, you don't have to spend 30 pages explaining why it is, right? You just go to the heart of the matter. So the Chief Justice's opinion was trying to do two things. He was trying to first save the law, but also lay down precedents that might help limited federal powers in the future. And I've stopped trying to psychoanalyze this. I don't even know anymore. I gave up on trying to figure it out. But in the end, the Chief's opinion upheld the law. I think it did violence to the ideas that judges should do what they believe. He had some other ulterior motives, but we're stuck with that. And that's the law.
All right, I do have a response. Simple response. Read the opinion yourself. It's not that long, it's not that scary. Just do it. See how persuasive you find the arguments, all right? Easy answer. And my own personal view is I am very much in favor of the Affordable Care Act in a very broad sense. It's a very strange statement to say that I'm in favor of the Affordable Care Act because it's extremely complicated and some of the moving parts. I'm in favor of the fundamental goals underlying it, that we should serve our fellow citizens, that we should provide coverage. However that is implemented or operationalized should be done in ideally a way that we all prefer. But it is a law, and we are implementing it in Minnesota, and I think that the idea now is to focus, what is it, what does it mean, what does it mean for Minnesota, what does it mean for us, and if it's possible to construct or to design something that's even better, all the better to do that.
Yeah, I was gonna talk a lot about the mandate, but I was wanting to also talk a little bit about the Medicaid expansion. Because I understand that the opinion does say the Medicaid expansion piece is unconstitutional in terms of being a living person.
Okay.
So two questions in terms of whether you agree with that new argument and sort of precedents that the role on that piece of it. Because that was actually the piece of the opinion that surprised me the most, was that all of a sudden the federal government has limited spending powers in some ways. And
If anyone needs to go, please,
Yeah.
please, yes.
Whether that result has really helped us meet our goals of expanded access, because now we have, a handful, more than a handful of states refusing to do Medicaid expansion, so we're not even really expanding coverage like the laws. So even though the mandate has been unconstitutional, Medicaid expansion is not, so that has affected.
Right, so here's the issue, right? And I'll go back to 2009. So shortly after the ACA was proposed, Governor Jan Brewer of Arizona sent a letter to HHS. And she said, federal government, if we don't expand our Medicaid, what happens? And HHS wrote a letter back saying, if you don't take this new money, you lose 100% of your Medicaid budget. You lose $8 billion from your budget. In other words, if you don't take this new money, they lose their entire budget. The government spent 3 years running from that letter, okay? They basically denied it existed, we don't take that position, but the letter was there, it's in the record. And Paul Clement, the Wonder Boy, brought out oral arguments, okay? So the issue with Medicaid was there actually a choice for the states, right? Could they actually turn down this new expansion? And by a vote of 7-2, the Supreme Court said, no, it's not a choice. It's like putting a gun to your head and saying your money or your life. Is it really a choice? Would anyone give it to say, no, you can take my life instead? So that's the analogy the court used. And that was striking because to that point, not a single court had found the Medicaid expansion was unconstitutional, not one. The first time in the Supreme Court. So now what we have, what's the number, 24 states, I think, most recently have said we're not going to participate?
I think that's right.
Yeah, 24 states, so my own home state of Texas and others. So Angela can speak to this more, but it's actually created a two-tiered system of medical assistance in America where you have half the states people at a certain level of poverty line can get it, and the other half of the states, they can't. So does this frustrate the goal of expanding coverage? Yeah. Do I think it's permanent? No, I think eventually all states, maybe except for Texas, will eventually opt in given time. You'll have Greg Abbott on the top of the Alamo with a rifle.
Probably will, yeah.
I think
If
Texas,
they're eventually gonna opt in,
they have to.
I mean, there is a choice, and
Yeah.
it seems like they are making a choice.
Yeah, and they're making the choice. So I mean, look, Arizona, Jan Brewer said, I'll do it. Rick Scott in Florida, I'll do it. Kasich in Ohio, I'll do it. These are all the,
Yeah.
Eventually, they said I'll do
well,
it.
yeah.
Not for the first.
Well, because the legislatures are opposing them, and they need their legislators to permission. Virginia now with Terry McCullough, he might try and do it himself, the legislature might say no. So I mean, this is a live issue, and Andrew can speak more to the policy aspect of that.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I thought that was a very interesting point you made about the culture of states, and it kind of would end up creating this like second-class, subclass of citizens in the states that refuse the expansion, because their poor people are getting even less than poor people in the next door states. How does that ultimately start affecting decisions people make about where to live, where to have a family? And then when you get that kind of disparity between just neighboring states, Wisconsin and Minnesota, eventually doesn't the federal government have an affirmative kind of duty to step in and be like, look, we've got all this craziness here, there's this second-class citizen like nothing happening in the state culture. So that's not really a question.
It's an interesting observation, and I think we just have to see how it plays out. My own assumption, I don't live in Texas, I don't know, but I can only assume that their constituencies would probably start advocating for an expansion eventually.
Because could the citizens then sue the state, like could the citizens of Wisconsin sue Wisconsin and be like, we need you to have more Medicaid?
The way you do is by voting Democrats into office. That's how people
Through
can
the
affect change.
political process.
Yeah, I mean, there's
certainly.
that works very easily. Elect a Democratic governor, elect Democrats into office, and it'll happen. That's how things work.
Yeah, well, that's all affected by money and who's paying and buying elections.
That's my
Well,
issue.
that's the underserved populations.
And if we have time for one more question? Okay. Ma'am?
No, it's just that, what were we just reading that, in the civil rights laws was where the government stepped in and said, this is something that everyone needs to abide by, not just the states couldn't opt out. And if this is gonna be some kind of a moral mandate, I don't understand why, the government isn't stepping in here and,
Well, they
like you
couldn't.
said, and evening it out.
That's exactly what the Supreme Court held they couldn't do by a vote of 7-2. They couldn't force states to take this money.
And we're kind of conflating.
Well, that's South Dakota v. Dole, and that's the issue, and she asked about the Dole, she didn't actually answer her question. The issue in South Dakota v. Dole was if you take federal money, it's a lower speed limit, right? But they held that was actually a choice, that if you don't take the federal highway money, you're not bankrupting your state. Here, if you turn down this Medicaid expansion, you lose 1/8 of your budget, $8 billion from Arizona's budget, which is almost their entire budget.
I'll just say, I think we have to be careful to be conflating the merits of the policy with the legal action. I mean, I can't speak to the constitutionality as much, I'm not an expert like Josh, but it's kind of two different discussions that we're having here. Do we feel that the Affordable Care Act, as much as we know about it in all of its different aspects, has merit? Most of it, some of it, maybe not all of it, and then Josh is speaking to the historical and the legal side, the constitutionality side, which isn't necessarily a discussion about the merits of the policy. So just keeping those things in. Which therefore makes for an interesting dialogue between the two of us, and so I think we're probably
Any other
about to
question? Anything else?
conclude here, I think.
Anything else?
I just have one quick question. So at what point do we, does our government as a whole say, okay, we have a duty to uphold the law, like it or not, this is the law. And if it's so terrible, then it'll fail. Let it fail. Or let's work on it. I mean, at what point does that happen? When does it become futile or counterproductive to keep fighting a law that is a law?
So let me give you an example. Roe v. Wade. Right? Was it 1974, 73? Yeah, 73, 31st anniversary was last week. How long have we been fighting over a law they don't feel is legitimate, or a case they don't feel is legitimate? 3 decades? We're in for the long haul, friends. That's why I'm writing a sequel, right? I think there are analogies. This is, I mean, the analogies are actually fairly, in an interesting way. This was something that came down. People weren't really expecting it, it was building up to it. People opposed it. It galvanized massive opposition on a fundamental issue of constitutional law and also of health and access. And 30 years later, people still want to chip at it every step they can get. My state as well. I mean, so yeah, not going anywhere. This is what happens when you have things that come out. I think if you look at a contrast of, I mentioned the Civil Rights Act, the American Disabilities Act, which was brought on with bipartisan support, you don't see nearly the level of antagonism to it. And it fades.
And I'll just mention, Cecilia, that we've been discussing and working on this in Minnesota for 22 years. We've been talking about health reform. Minnesota passed its own health reform in 2008. it's not a new and random thing that just transpired here in Minnesota. We've been having this dialogue for a long time.
And it's very hard to have this dialogue when half the states don't wanna have it. And when they feel
Point
forced to
taken.
it. All right, anything else? Thank you all so much. This was a
Thank you.
lovely discussion.
Thank you.